Imagine a quiet suburban street on a lazy summer afternoon. The hum of lawnmowers fills the air, kids are riding their bikes, and the smell of fresh cut grass drifts through open windows. It's the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, or so they think. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect community, tensions are brewing. Today, those tensions are about to come to a head in a way no one could have predicted. Meet Jamal, a 16-year-old with a passion for basketball and big dreams of playing in the NBA someday. He's a regular kid with a kind heart, always offering to help neighbors carry their groceries or mow their lawns. Jamal's lived on this street his whole life. It's his home, his comfort zone, and he's always felt safe here. But lately, things have been different. He's noticed the way some people look at him like he doesn't belong. It's subtle, but he can feel it. And one neighbor, in particular, has made it clear he's not welcome. Enter Mr. Thompson. He's lived next door to Jamal's family for years, but they've never been close. Mr. Thompson is a man of routine. He spends most of his days meticulously tending to his lawn or sitting on his porch with a scowl that could stop a clock. He keeps to himself, but when he does speak, his words carry weight, often heavy with judgment. And for reasons Jamal can't quite understand, Mr. Thompson seems to have a special disdain for him. It all started a few weeks ago when Jamal accidentally threw his basketball over the fence into Mr. Thompson's yard. Jamal knocked on the door to apologize and get his ball back, but the reception was anything but warm. Mr. Thompson glared at him through the screen door, his face like stone. "You people need to learn to respect other people's property," he snapped, handing Jamal the ball with a force that sent him stumbling backward. Jamal was too stunned to respond. "You people? What did that even mean?" Since then, things have only escalated. Mr. Thompson watches Jamal's every move, muttering under his breath whenever Jamal walks by. The tension is palpable, and Jamal can't shake the feeling that Mr. Thompson is just waiting for him to mess up. But Jamal isn't one to back down. He decides to kill him with kindness, hoping to prove that he's not the person Mr. Thompson seems to think he is. One day, Jamal sees Mr. Thompson struggling to carry a heavy bag of mulch across his yard. Without hesitation, Jamal jogs over to help. "I got it, Mr. Thompson," he says with a smile, reaching for the bag. But instead of gratitude, Jamal is met with an icy glare. "I don't need your help," Mr. Thompson growls, snatching the bag away. Jamal steps back, heart sinking. Why does he hate me so much? Things come to a head one fateful afternoon. Jamal is shooting hoops in his driveway when he notices Mr. Thompson standing at the edge of his yard, arms crossed, eyes locked on him. Jamal tries to ignore it, but the weight of Mr. Thompson's stare is too much. Finally, he stops, ball in hand, and looks over. "Is there a problem, Mr. Thompson?" he asks, trying to keep his voice steady. Mr. Thompson steps closer, his face twisted with anger. "Yeah, there is," he says, his voice low but filled with menace. "You and your kind think you can do whatever you want, but not in my neighborhood." The words hang in the air, heavy and loaded. Jamal's heart pounds in his chest. He wants to speak up, to defend himself, but the words catch in his throat. Before Jamal can respond, a voice cuts through the tension. "Dad, what are you doing?" It's Sarah, Mr. Thompson's daughter, standing on their front porch, her face a mix of shock and disbelief. Mr. Thompson turns, startled, as if he hadn't realized she was there. "Go back inside, Sarah," he says, but she doesn't budge. "No, Dad," she says firmly, stepping forward. "This isn't right." She looks at Jamal, her eyes filled with apology. "I'm so sorry, Jamal. You don't deserve this." Jamal feels a rush of relief but also confusion. Why is Sarah apologizing? What's really going on here? Mr. Thompson looks furious, his face red, but Sarah doesn't back down. "Dad," she says softly, her voice trembling. "It's time they knew the truth." "The truth?" Jamal's mind races. "What truth?" He looks between Sarah and Mr. Thompson, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. What could possibly explain Mr. Thompson's behavior? And why does Sarah seem so desperate to set things right? And just like that, everything Jamal thought he knew about his neighbor, about his family, about his entire life, is about to be turned upside down. But to find out what happens next, you'll have to stay tuned. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Jamal stood frozen, the basketball heavy in his hands, as Sarah's words echoed in his mind. The truth? He glanced at Mr. Thompson, whose face was a storm of emotions: anger, fear, and something else Jamal couldn't quite place. Whatever this truth was, it felt like it had been buried for a long time, and now it was clawing its way to the surface. Sarah stepped down from the porch, her eyes locked on her father. You need to tell him, she said, her voice soft but firm. He deserves to know. Mr. Thompson shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. It's none of his business, he muttered, but his voice lacked its usual bite. Jamal's pulse quickened. Tell me what? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure he wanted to know, but at the same time, he couldn't stand the suspense. What's going on? Sarah took a deep breath and looked at Jamal, her expression a mix of guilt and determination. Jamal, she said, her voice trembling, you remind my dad of someone. Someone he lost a long time ago. Jamal frowned, confused. What do you mean? She glanced at her father, who was now staring at the ground, his hands clenched into fists. My dad had a younger brother, Sarah continued. His name was Marcus. He was black. The words hit Jamal like a ton of bricks. Wait, he said, struggling to process what he just heard. Your uncle was black? Sarah nodded. Yes. My grandparents adopted him when he was a baby. He and my dad grew up together. They were close, but... Her voice trailed off, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower down the street. Jamal looked at Mr. Thompson, who still hadn't said a word. But what? Jamal prompted, his voice tinged with urgency. Sarah hesitated, then continued. When Marcus was a teenager, he got into some trouble. Nothing serious, just typical teenage stuff. But one night, he was walking home, and someone called the police on him. They said he looked suspicious. The police came, and things escalated. Marcus. He didn't make it home that night. Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't imagine how hard that must have been. Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. It broke my dad, she said. He never talks about it, but I know he blames himself. He thinks he should have been there to protect Marcus. And ever since, he's been different. He pushes people away, especially people who remind him of Marcus. Jamal's eyes flicked to Mr. Thompson, who finally looked up, his eyes glistening. I see Marcus every time I look at you, Mr. Thompson said, his voice hoarse. It's like he's here, and it hurts. It hurts because I failed him. Jamal's heart ached for the man standing before him. He could see now that Mr. Thompson's anger wasn't about hate, it was about pain. Deep, unresolved pain that had festered for years. You didn't fail him, Jamal said gently. What happened to Marcus wasn't your fault. Mr. Thompson shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. I should have done more, he said. I should have fought harder for him. And now it's too late. Jamal stepped closer, his voice steady. It's not too late, he said. You can still make a difference. You can still honor Marcus by being better, by letting people in instead of shutting them out. For a moment, the air was thick with emotion. Then, slowly, Mr. Thompson nodded. You're right, he said quietly. I've let my pain turn me into someone I don't want to be. I'm sorry, Jamal. I've been unfair to you. Jamal felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Thank you, he said. That means a lot. The tension between them began to ease, replaced by a sense of understanding. It wasn't a perfect resolution, years of hurt don't disappear overnight, but it was a start. As the days went by, Jamal and Mr. Thompson began to forge a tentative friendship. They shared stories, worked on projects together, and slowly but surely, the walls between them came down. Jamal learned more about Marcus and the incredible person he was, and Mr. Thompson found a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. But just when it seemed like everything was settling down, life threw one more curveball. One evening, as Jamal was helping Mr. Thompson organize some old boxes in the garage, they came across a dusty photo album. Inside were pictures of Mr. Thompson and Marcus as kids, their smiles wide and carefree. But tucked between the pages was something else, a letter, yellowed with age. Mr. Thompson's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the words, and his face paled. This is from Marcus," he whispered. Jamal leaned in, curious. "What does it say?" Mr. Thompson read the letter aloud, his voice shaking. In it, Marcus spoke about his struggles, his dreams, and his gratitude for the family that had taken him in. But at the end of the letter, there was a revelation that left both Jamal and Mr. Thompson stunned. "I found out recently that I have a biological brother," Marcus had written. "He doesn't know about me yet, but I hope one day we can meet. His name is Jamal." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. "What?" he said, his voice barely audible. "That can't be." But as he looked at the letter, the pieces began to fall into place. His parents had always been vague about his family history, and now he understood why. Tears streamed down Mr. Thompson's face. "Jamal," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you're not just a neighbor. You're family." In that moment, everything changed. The pain of the past was still there, but it was joined by something else, hope. Hope for healing, for connection, and for a future where the ties that bind are stronger than the forces that try to tear us apart. The discovery hit Jamal like a wave, leaving him breathless and disoriented. The idea that Marcus, a man he'd never met but who had unknowingly shaped so much of his life, was his biological brother was almost too much to process. Jamal's mind raced with questions. How could this be true? Why had his parents never told him? And what did this mean for him and Mr. Thompson? For a moment, the garage was silent except for the faint rustling of the old letter in Mr. Thompson's hands. Jamal looked at him, seeing the man in a new light, not as the grumpy neighbor who had watched him with suspicion, but as someone who had shared a deep, unspoken connection with him all along. "I can't believe this," Jamal said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All this time, and I never knew." Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression softening. "Neither did I," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But it makes sense now. That feeling I had when I saw you, it wasn't just a reminder of Marcus. It was something deeper." Jamal sat down on an old stool, his thoughts swirling. "I need to talk to my parents," he said. "I need to know why they kept this from me." Mr. Thompson placed a hand on his shoulder. "And they owe you that," he said. "But remember, Jamal, family isn't just about blood. It's about who's there for you, who stands by you. You've got a family in your parents, and now, you've got a family in me too if you'll have me." Jamal looked up, his eyes meeting Mr. Thompson's. In that moment, the resentment and misunderstandings that had once defined their relationship melted away. "I'd like that," Jamal said with a small smile. Later that evening, Jamal sat down with his parents in the living room, the letter from Marcus clutched tightly in his hand. They listened quietly as he recounted everything that had happened, from Mr. Thompson's initial hostility to the shocking discovery in the garage. When he finished, his mother's eyes were filled with tears. "Jamal," she said, her voice trembling, "we wanted to tell you, but we didn't know how. We didn't want to confuse you or make you feel like you weren't our son in every way that matters." His father nodded, his expression somber. "We thought we were protecting you," he said. "But looking back, maybe we were just scared. Scared of what it would mean for you, for all of us." Jamal took a deep breath, letting their words sink in. He could see the love and regret in their eyes, and though he still had questions, he knew they had acted out of love. "I get it," he said finally. "But I wish I'd known. I wish I could have had the chance to know Marcus, to know more about where I come from." His mother reached out, placing a hand on his. "It's not too late to learn," she said. "We'll tell you everything we know about Marcus, about his life, about the family he was searching for. And we'll do it together." In the weeks that followed, Jamal and his family began piecing together Marcus's story. They dug through old photos, letters, and memories, uncovering a history that was both painful and beautiful. Mr. Thompson became an integral part of this journey, sharing stories of his brother that brought him to life in ways Jamal had never imagined. Through it all, Jamal felt a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. He saw how the threads of his life were interwoven with those of Marcus, Mr. Thompson, and even his parents in ways that were profound and unshakable. But life, as always, had one final twist. One afternoon, Jamal received a message from someone he didn't recognize. It was from a man named David, who claimed to be another biological sibling of Marcus and by extension Jamal. David had recently discovered his connection to Marcus through a DNA test and had been searching for answers ever since. Jamal's heart raced as he read the message. Could it be true? Could there be even more family out there, waiting to be discovered? After discussing it with his parents and Mr. Thompson, Jamal decided to meet David. Their meeting was emotional and surreal. David was older, with a kind smile and a warmth that immediately put Jamal at ease. As they shared stories and compared notes, Jamal felt an undeniable connection. It was as if he were piecing together a puzzle he hadn't even known existed. Through David, Jamal learned more about Marcus's early life and the family circumstances that had led to their separation. It was a complex and often heartbreaking story, but it also underscored the resilience and strength of the human spirit. By the end of their conversation, Jamal felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his journey was about more than just uncovering the past, it was about building a future where these connections could thrive. He vowed to honor Marcus's memory by fostering the relationships he had discovered and by continuing to break down the walls that had once divided them. As the months passed, the neighborhood that had once seemed so ordinary became a symbol of transformation. Jamal and Mr. Thompson grew closer, their bond deepened by their shared history and newfound understanding. Sarah became a frequent visitor, her warmth and humor adding light to their lives. And Jamal's family embraced their expanding circle, welcoming David and his family with open arms. In the end, Jamal realized that life is full of unexpected twists and turns. But it's in those moments of uncertainty and discovery that we find our true strength. He learned that family is not just about where you come from, but about who you choose to stand with, who you choose to forgive, and who you choose to love. And as he stood in his driveway one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jamal felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And in his heart, he knew Marcus would have been proud. Life moves forward, and so did Jamal. But he carried with him the lessons of the past, the strength of his family, and the unshakable belief that even in the face of pain and loss, there is always hope.